If you look at the video, and by the way, Veritas means truth in Latin. It's one of the most common words in the English language.
If you're watching this video, then chances are you're probably already aware of Project Veritas and its founder, conservative apologist and fail-son extraordinaire James O'Keefe. You see, James has been on a tear recently, releasing video after video of clips from CNN's 9 a.m. editorial meetings that he had secretly been recording for around 2 to 3 months. James and Project Veritas' main claim in all of this is that CNN CEO Jeff Zucker runs the organization with an iron fist, that CNN is full of yes-men, and that they are the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. James makes a lot of other claims and insinuations as well, but we'll go over those later. The kind of dishonest faux journalism practiced by James O'Keefe and his associates at Project Veritas is completely counterproductive to his alleged goal of a more ethical and transparent society. They recklessly erode public confidence in otherwise trustworthy institutions by fabricating evidence of vast conspiracies while engaging in all the deception and corruption they allegedly work to expose. Thanks to social media, it's never been easier for propagandists to spread disinformation. James O'Keefe may have mastered the art. In this video, I want to take a look at James and Project Veritas' recent activity surrounding CNN as a sort of case study into how they operate and try to explain some of the tricks they use to create outrage out of thin air. Like any good illusionist, James's ruse works best when he can get you to trick yourself. For example, let's take a look at this.
The Hunter Biden story was an explosive blow against Joe Biden leading up to the presidential election. But listen on this 9 a.m. editorial conference call at CNN, how President Jeff Zucker chooses to not cover this important story.
I think on the Breitbart, New York Post, Fox News rabbit hole of Hunter Biden, which I don't think anybody outside of that world understood last night, the Wall Street Journal reported that their review of all corporate records showed no role for Joe Biden on the Chinese deal. And yes, I do put more credibility in the Wall Street Journal than I do in the New York Post.
With a little sleight of hand, James is able to take what is otherwise a pretty banal audio bite and sprinkle some sinister intrigue on top. He had so little that he even includes Zucker citing the Wall Street Journal as another publication that was unable to verify the story. Why would the head of a giant news corporation risk his station's credibility on a national stage by running a story that no other major publications would print and couldn't be verified or corroborated? Unlike Project Veritas, credibility is foundational to the success of most major news outlets since their viewers generally desire factual information and high-quality reporting, whereas the success of Project Veritas is based on producing as many viral videos as quickly as possible to remain socially relevant and generate donations from special interest groups. If you remove your CNN hate goggles for a moment, it's easier to see how Zucker was not only following the examples set by his peers and competitors, but that he was doing the right thing as a journalist. He correctly chose not to run a fake news story. Much like the election nonsense we're currently living through, this is another example of people finding malice in a system they don't understand. Along these same lines, one of James' talking points is how Zucker and his exec buddies are the central committee of CNN, who decide who says what and how they'll say it. Categorizing Zucker as an iron-fisted neoliberal Stalin is interesting, though, because if you listen to some of the full recordings, Zucker consistently asks for feedback and actively seeks out insight from others before moving on to the next topic. As someone who's a veteran of plenty of boring meetings, sounds like a boss trying to get his day in order and keep the meeting moving. If you want to see for yourself, I've included links below to Google Docs I've created with abbreviated transcripts and timestamps to the only 2 full videos that James has released at the time of this writing. He's very eager to flood Twitter with his out-of-context videos, including this masterclass in false equivalency, but for some reason he tends to be hesitant in his efforts towards transparency. Even if he does release all the raw audio, the damage has already been done. James knows his viewers are already disinterested in listening to the full audio. In their minds, it's a waste of time since it will only confirm to them what they already know. However, by staggering these releases over time, he's maintaining Project Veritas' presence in social and traditional media while hamstringing his critics' ability to fact-check him. As long as their drops are popular, they do not care whether or not they're true. Alright, the fact-checking stuff is fine, but let's take a second to have a little fun. As mentioned, James loves to go on Fox News, and you know that someone like Sean Hannity isn't going to turn down a chance to take part in a controversy. Well, Hannity invited James on after the first few CNN leaks to have a calm, mature conversation and to provide their viewers with the high-quality, insightful analysis that two media veterans such as them should be able to.
All right, tonight even more tapes from Inside Fake News CNN exposing just how depraved, deceitful, dishonest they are Democratic Party operatives, a propaganda arm. They are Pravda. They are blatantly biased and abusively so and hypocritical to the core.
This thing from journalism that I'm aware of, Sean, because investigative reporting is about unearthing facts from the bottom. That's not what you're seeing here.
Pretty strong words from a guy whose own journalistic ineptitude literally helped win a Pulitzer in investigative reporting for the Washington Post.
You did it. Good job. I can't believe it. I'm proud of you.
I just want that to set in. James O'Keefe is such a bad journalist that he won a Pulitzer Prize for someone else. Well, you would think that a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist like James should have a pretty keen eye for journalistic malpractice, but for some reason he seems to miss some of the worst offenders. For instance, and this may come as a shock to you, but Sean Hannity isn't exactly a paragon of journalistic integrity. You only need to go back to the start of this administration to find a pattern of shocking negligence to his ethical responsibilities. For starters, Hannity was less than transparent about retaining Michael Cohen, the disgraced ex-personal lawyer of Donald Trump, when he claimed on Fox that Robert Mueller, quote, declared war against the United States, end quote, after learning he was in possession of private documents from Cohen's office. Hannity also flaunted ethical responsibilities when he campaigned for Donald Trump by going on stage and speaking at a televised Trump midterm election rally, even after consistently insisting that he wouldn't. Until recently, Hannity would have multiple direct one-on-one phone calls with the president every week. Now, Sean Hannity is in no way, shape, or form a journalist. However, he consistently presents himself as one when it's convenient, and by doing so, he grants himself the benefits of the perceived authority and sincerity of a journalist without the pesky ethical responsibilities. The issue here is that O'Keefe and Hannity are completely aware of this. It's not just that they're hypocrites, it's that their end goal is to erode public trust in anything that doesn't jive with their ideology, and they have the privilege of not being restrained by the truth, which makes them dangerous. There are so many examples just from this drop alone that we could go over, and maybe someday we will, but for now, we'll end with this.
According to Senior Vice President of CNN, Cynthia Hudson, the reason that Cubans voted for Trump is because they're attracted to bullies. Check this out.
The only reason they are supporting Trump is because of that narrative. And that narrative and the fact that, sadly, I have to say, there's a population that is very attracted to bullies.
As you've probably guessed by now, James is not giving us the full story. He's only giving us what he wants us to see. James is a whiz at strategically withholding information. For instance, here he refers to Hudson as a senior VP, but he neglects to use her full title, Senior Vice President and General Manager of CNN en Español and Hispanic Strategy for CNN US. It's a mouthful, to be sure, but it more accurately represents her experience and scope of responsibility at the company. She has over 25 years of reporting on Latin issues in North, Central, and South America. You'd be hard-pressed to say that she doesn't have some level of expertise. Cynthia Hudson is also herself a Latina woman. Or more specifically, she's the great-great-granddaughter of Cuban immigrants. That's right, the big racist reveal that James had for us was a Cuban woman giving insight to a culture that she grew up in. Of course, being Latina doesn't mean that she's immune to racism, but James knows that with her name and appearance, this information isn't immediately apparent, and that if he were to reveal the full scope of her professional and personal history, you may be more inclined to sympathize with her in spite of his attempts at obscuring context. Even if I were to grant that her pithy language exposed some level of intolerance or lack of sensitivity, I personally don't think that people like James, Tucker Carlson, or Sean Hannity are in any position to call others out for their handling of race issues. That is the same Tucker Carlson whose head writer Blake Neff was made to resign in July of 2020 after it was found out that he had been actively posting racist, sexist, homophobic, and otherwise bigoted comments in a forum under the pseudonym Charles XII. This is a man who would brag how when Tucker read off his teleprompter, quote, "the first draft was written by me." With all of his citizen reporters on the case, dedicated to exposing media bias, I can't believe that James wasn't the one to break this story. Now, obviously, none of this disproves James' claim of racial bias at CNN, but it does show a pattern of, at best, inconsistent application of outrage, and, at worst, self-serving, hypocritical behavior. I guess James was just too busy worrying about the speck in his brother's eye to notice the log in his own. There is so much more that I wanted to get to in this video, but I'm already incredibly late releasing it, so I unfortunately had to cut out a lot of the research and writing I did. However, I do plan on continuing to cover more of Project Veritas' strategies in the future, so more than likely we'll get to see some of those notes reutilized in another video. Underneath this video, you'll find the links to the transcripts that I mentioned earlier, with the time codes alongside a document with all my citations, and another document that tried to condense some of the ideas, claims, and hypocrisies detailed in this video. You will also find some links that lead to great resources for teaching media literacy and recognizing fake news. I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, and share. This has been Anti-Malarkey Action, and thanks for stopping by.
I'll turn tricks.